All right. Hi, everybody. It's our CFB Talk 165. It is Tuesday night, 10 p.m., when we like to talk to you. This is when we talk to you about whatever you want to talk about in college football and take your calls. A lot of stuff going on. It's Tuesday. I see we've got some folks joining us in the audience. Of course, with other sports programming, we had a late edition of the college football playoff rankings released. We also have three different Maction games going on with Bowling Green leading Toledo. That would actually be a significant upset in that rivalry. Akron's barely leading Eastern Michigan, and Northern Illinois managed to shut out Western Michigan. But that's so much more going on. This has been one hell of a week. I was actually, as I was preparing for tonight, just looking at some of the top conversations over the past week on our CFB. And I mean, it just kind of it underlines all the craziness that's been going on. I mean, obviously, Jimbo was fired as Texas A&M. Big Ten conference, punished Jim Harbaugh by suspending him at least until unless pending litigation until the end of the regular season. Uh, the upset, obviously, probably the victories, the upset of UCF over Oklahoma State, Michigan defeating Penn State, and obviously those were just some of the headlines that we saw so far. But I see we have some folks who want to join us, so let's get some conversations rolling here. Let's see, Drew, I saw you up first. Would love to talk to you. What's going on?
All right. So, first off, I would just like to say, Penn State. I'm a Penn State. I go to Penn State. Terrible, terrible. I just don't know when it's gonna end. Uh, Jim Jim Franklin is terrible. He's always been terrible. It just always seems like he's only being kept around just to be good and not to be great. And I just think the school's got to call it quits. It's when you're a program as historic as Penn State has been. I grew up watching Penn State and falling in love with it, and then obviously the Joe Pa stuff happened, and the school went downhill, and basically Saquon Barkley brought it back just in itself. And now we're supposed to be this team every year that this is finally the year that we get over the hump. We beat University of Michigan. We beat Ohio State, and oh man, it's just every year it just seems like the same thing. We will always be good but never be great. And I'm surprised that we're even at 12. I saw LSU just absolutely tear it up. They should be above us. Ole Miss should be above us. Even Oklahoma. I mean, it's just I was shocked to see us still even in the top 15 after consistently getting beaten down by all these upper echelon teams that we're supposed to be competing with every year, and we always get hope, and then it's just heartbreak year in and year out. And I'm just so tired of it. And we don't even get to play Michigan next year. I'm from Michigan, so I had all my friends from home just just texting me and calling me and making fun of me, and I just I just have to express my frustration. It's just been nothing but pain for the past 4 years. I'm a senior now. So this is hopefully the final year where I can go home to Thanksgiving and rub it in my uncle's face that we finally beat Michigan and they're cheaters, but no, didn't happen.
Man, that is brutal. And it's interesting. The whole Penn State situation is kind of as an observer, objective outside of that area. It's curious because I was having a conversation because I do another podcast with Shehan Jayaraja for Advanced Media Group, and we were having a conversation about Penn State, and a couple of things kind of strike me. First of all, with Jimbo now done, I'm wondering, is the next heavily paid coach of a program that feels like they should be going up to that next level? Is that kind of the tension now for James Franklin, now that Jimbo Fisher's kind of was a much larger bullseye now that he's kind of out of the way? But at the same time, comparing success on the field, I mean, Jimbo didn't do as well as James Franklin did, and it's kind of weird. My joke I had immediately sprung to mind after watching what happened with Michigan this past weekend is there would be no more appropriate way to honor James Franklin than building a bronze statue because he always comes in third. Um, but but at the same time, okay, setting those jokes aside, it almost seems like though Penn State, if they can continue with what they're doing now, and I mean right now, again, look, as you said, they're number 12. I'm sort of surprised they're number 12. I don't know but I don't know where I would have placed them. I think Oregon State, certainly in my mind, and Mizzou are the stronger two loss teams at this moment, but I don't know.
Easily.
I don't know where I put them with the rest at this point. So in the playoff universe that we're going to next year, suddenly Penn State might be able to get in. And I don't know. I don't know if this is necessarily a viable route. Maybe that means Penn State is a continuous first round playoff team. But who knows? Maybe they could also work their way up, get, mixing it up with who they're playing, potentially, or, their usual, cursed games with Michigan and Ohio State. Maybe someone else will beat them, and they'll just get
it's
to
probably going to be
who
Washington.
Knows?
Washington, or I don't even know, whoever USC has coming up next after Caleb leaves. But I looked at the schedule, and it's just, I have hope because Chip Kelly obviously is expected to leave out of UCLA, and we play UCLA next year. But it's just every year I get my hopes up, like, oh man, like finally, and even with the 12, like, yeah, we could be a 12 or 11 in the playoffs, but then we're just gonna get smoked. We're gonna get smoked by a team because we'll always be good and never be great. And if we were in the SEC, I guarantee you, every year we would be the Texas A&M of the SEC. If we were in the SEC, we can never beat a quality team. And I don't know, like James Franklin, he just fires offensive coordinators every single year, just putting the blame on somebody else other than him. He's a great recruiter. He gets talent here every year. 5-star quarterback, 5-star DN, the best tackle in the entire nation. And just nothing ever. And as Penn State fan, we are all sick of it. We're sick of it. We expect better.
I can imagine. I just wanted to go ahead and also introduce my co-host tonight. Again, my name's Bobak Ha'Eri. I am joined by my fellow colleague, Andrew Sagona. Andrew, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing very well, Bobak. How are you doing?
I'm good. There's so much going on. It's kind of wild to think about that. But I know you were on the call with the post college football ranking show. What anything interesting you heard insight coming from Buke, Oregon?
If at the risk of, well, basically nothing really. Last week was a lot more interesting with what they were discussing. Last week came down about the whole JMU thing. They were filing an appeal. There was a lot more moving parts and more interesting questions were asked. But this time, really, the G5 wasn't really mentioned at all. Tulane and Liberty, some people are saying should have been mentioned, but they weren't. Really, the main topic, heck, even Michigan wasn't brought up this time. There were probably 3 or 4 questions asked about Michigan last week. None were asked this week. I'd say the biggest thing was, why did Georgia go ahead of Ohio State, and kind of gave a non-answer. An interesting question that was asked was why Washington stayed ahead of Florida State. And
you mean Washington?
Yes, sorry. Why Florida State stayed ahead of Washington, right? It's kind of reading in between the lines. It kind of gave the sense that Washington was being dinged for giving up a lot of points recently, as well as having a few close wins against, we'll say, subpar teams like Arizona State. Whereas looking at, he didn't explicitly mention, he meaning Buke, Oregon. Basically, looking at Florida State's schedule, they have fewer close wins and more blowout wins than Washington does. And basically, it almost seemed like the closeness of the Utah game and the Miami game didn't really factor into the decision to keep FSU ahead of Washington.
Got it. Interesting. No, I think a lot of that was one of those curiosities is how I could see that. I mean, Washington certainly has had its struggles, and I kind of do tend to understand how they've stayed in that position as the fifth undefeated team. I mean, it'll work out if they manage to win out, particularly with what looks like a showdown with Oregon. But yeah, that Arizona State game and just simply giving up points as easily as they have, it's kind of an interesting. I'm actually really curious with Kalen DeBoer how he looks after Penix leaves, because these last 2 seasons he's had an incredible quarterback, and that can make a difference. Although not all the difference. I mean, Caleb Williams can only do so much, right? But Rocky, you've been super patient. And again, for those of you waiting in the queue, I promise I will try to do my best to get to all of you. But what's on your mind, Rocky?
Hey, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Awesome, cool. Just wanted to make sure I got it right this time. So, this is going to be a two-part question. First part is, what are your thoughts? Do you see Neil Brown getting fired from West Virginia this year with an 8-4 schedule, as he's most likely going to get? Now, if he gets a 7-5, he's done. There's numerous sources that have been like, if he even drops a single another game, he's done. But there's a couple avenues to that. I just wanted to tie on to that. So first off is he's right now he's got a very the biggest reason why he's even still there is his salary is just something that a lot of people don't understand. So just to put this in comparison, Nick Saban has a base salary about 1.1 million. The rest of Nick Saban's salary actually comes from incentives. To put that into perspective, Neil Brown's base salary at West Virginia, regardless of anything else he does, he could literally lose every single game of the year, is 4.3 million. So, and this is tied into the athletic director that West Virginia had last year was fired. He was fired, but he was the one who basically wrote this contract, which is why so many people are pissed and why he got fired. Essentially, Neil Brown in his contract is, if he is fired at any moment, he is entitled to the entire remainder of his salary, which currently is somewhere in the 15 million, I believe, somewhere around there. There is a drop, but it doesn't come until January 1st, 2025, at which point his salary, his remaining salary that would take to buy him out is dropped by 15%. But the problem is he gets a 15% year raise automatically. So even if you wait till then, he's still going to make, even at 15% less, basically the same salary he made for 2022 for the remaining 2 years. So it's kind of a horrible, horrible contract that West Virginia got tied into with this guy. What are your thoughts? Do you see him getting fired at 8-4, or do you think they'll hang on to him?
Right. No, I think that's a great question. And all I was thinking was terrible for the school, but man, that was from that peak. It seemed to be a peak few years that I think I'm curious to see how we come out of it, particularly with whoever replaces Jimbo, with coaches just getting some incredible incentives that made schools immediately regret it. I mean, Mel Tucker, obviously they were able to get rid of him for totally different reasons, but going back to on the field now, I think certainly Neil Brown, I think, was one of the hottest seats heading into the season. Losing at Penn State wasn't, I mean, still, I mean, I know obviously we were previously just talking about Penn State. I still think, Penn State's a strong enough team, number 12, currently in the CFP. We all saw that unexpected kind of run there where people were like, oh, I think he's played his way off the hot seat. But that loss to Oklahoma this past weekend, Oklahoma's still a solid team. I mean, it was a blowout loss. That was, I know, disappointing for West Virginia fans, but I agree. If they can win out, I mean, if they beat Cincinnati and Baylor,
I was
and
say,
then
it's not just that. It's the fact that he lost to Houston against a team that didn't.
That was a wild ending. That was almost like one of those games where you're just like, okay, that happened. But
yeah, but the stats. The problem was the stats of the teams. If you looked at it leading into it, there's no reason the game should have ever been that close. I mean, Houston didn't do anything different. In fact, that was the big talk, is Houston did not do any plays. They did nothing different than they had done the entire year. Oklahoma did. I mean, Neil Brown even called them out, like they did some stuff we didn't see on tape, which is, how dare they?
But I just have to say, it's interesting that we are also even talking about Houston, because of the two coaches right now, I'd say Dan Holgerson's more in danger of getting fired at this point. I mean, he's gone on record of being kind of like cavalier about like, my buyout's too damn big, blah blah blah. But I wonder if Houston, because right now they're miserable right now. I mean, that losing to Cincinnati was completely unexpected, and granted, Oklahoma State, who knows after what happened.
Yeah, that was their first conference win, was against Houston, which nobody saw that coming.
Yeah, so I mean, But of the two coaches right now at this point in the season, I would say, because I mean Neil Brown, if he can if he can beat Cincinnati and get going on the road to Baylor isn't that much of a challenge this season, and get into a bowl and possibly win the bowl, it would be a tougher call. The other thing you always have to factor in too, Jimbo has kind of forced the coaching carousel to start moving, I think, faster than it would typically, because that when that shoe dropped, everyone's like, oh crap, we better let all these potential coaches know that we're going to be on the market. So, you see Mississippi State, you see suddenly Brady Hoke announces retiring. Not that that would be a comparable job, but, all of a sudden we're seeing all these coaches free up.
Which that leads into the second question. Who do you think would be better or worse, Jimbo Fisher or Rich Rod at West Virginia?
Oh my goodness.
Because they're both from West Virginia, so it's like
I'm always worried about bringing a coach back for a second run. It sometimes works. It certainly sometimes works. I mean, Schiano right now would probably be one of the leading candidates over at what he's pulling off at Rutgers on his second tenure. But, imagine Rich Rod going back after all these years. That would be something absolutely striking. I couldn't even imagine that.
It's actually kind of funny. I was talking to someone. If you look at the coaching staff of what Rich Rod has, people are like, man, Jack Stays, they're doing so good. I'm like, yeah, they literally have almost the entire West Virginia 2007 coaching staff. Like
that's amazing. I didn't realize they've stayed together so well.
Oh yeah, like I was looking. He's got if you look at the staff of Jack State right now, it is shockingly similar to the 2007 West Virginia team. Obviously without his offensive coordinator, because he passed away, unfortunately. But he's got Trickett back. He's got his quarterbacks coach back. It is hilarious if you look at the staff of Jack State that Rich Rod has assembled. He has literally almost assembled the entire West Virginia 2007 coaching staff. It's hilarious.
That's great. Hey, Andrew, I know you wanted to chime in really quick. Oh, or maybe not. So let me see. I want to get in a couple of other folks who've been really patient. Let's see here. Ski Mask Smurfy, I'm going to let you up. And then again, I see you, Nate. I see you. Well, actually, there's two different Nates. I see both Nates, and I see Colson. We'll try to get to you guys as well. Ski Mask Smurfy, what's going on, man?
Nothing much. Just another wonderful week of college football. That's insane. I wanted to talk about...
Absolutely. So many storylines.
Well, I want to talk about the storyline that the Pac-2 basically sort of won their court case today against the rest of the 10. I mean, it didn't.
Well, to be clear, because I love clarifying this stuff only because my own background as an attorney. So they won a preliminary injunction, but it takes a while to win it, and it was a lot was at stake. So what does it mean? It means that they were trying to keep the other. They convinced a trial court judge, and I'll say why that's important, that basically they have a winning argument or one that is likely to prevail. And so therefore this preliminary injunction that they should have control of the Pac-12 rather than the 10 teams that are leaving has been allowed to stay in action. But all of that said, and the judge isn't an idiot. He knows this is coming. They're going to almost certainly appeal this. And it's not to get too into the weeds of legal stuff, but a lot of these decisions are being made as matters of the law. And the reason I say that is anytime a judge makes a judgment call, but a judge makes a decision that's purely on law, not like facts, it can be appealed. And there's so much money at stake here that I think we're good for now, but I'm not going to necessarily announce that the Ewoks just blew up the Death Star or just, I don't know. That's not quite it. They pushed out the Imperial, like they freed Endor or anything like that. Not that the Pac-12 is Endor, but it's going to be interesting. And it's certainly, it's a good stage for Oregon State and Wazoo. I think we're going to see a lot of negotiation there. I think it sounds like, for example, with the whole, they were willing to kind of be open to the change of the playoff structure from 6+6 to 5-7, where it would be 5 conference champs plus 7 at-large teams, 5 and 7 split, because they're apparently it sounds like the CFP is willing to make sure they get a fair cut of what they would have been getting had the Pac-12 still been together. So basically, some of this may also be just negotiation tactics to make sure they get a fair shot of money. The judge definitely sent a warning, which I don't think is going to need to be enforced, to Wazoo and Oregon State, saying that if we get a hint that you guys are not playing fair with the other 10, I will end this preliminary injunction. So it's an interesting stage. I just want to be clear for those listening that it wasn't like, oh wow, the Tupac has won, they're going to be running away with it. It was more like a good, healthy step in this process.
Yeah, from what I gathered from watching a bit of the case and little people summarizing what happened is that basically the judge said they can't take basically their yearly revenue of $500 million and keep it all for the two. They still have to split it fairly amongst the rest. But the big thing was like basically the rest of the schools can still show up to every Pac-12 meeting, but only Oregon and Washington State can actually vote on what's happening. So I think that's really all they wanted. Just basically, he looked over their contract, was like, "Yeah, you guys basically signed this, and all of you leaving just basically allowed this to happen very easily."
I really want to know what that's going to be like in person, like the other 10 representatives just sitting in the room, like kind of every time a vote comes up, are they going to be kind of like staring at them and kind of like doing a smile or a frown just to see how they react to those results? I don't know. I'd be curious to see how that works in practice.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting.
But good for them. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see because I mean, one thing this will potentially open up is the because we're all waiting for that next wave of basically G5 realignment because the Pac-12 is going to need more members. Is it going to be an autonomous pair of teams that are going to eventually merge with others? Are they going to make an agreement with the Mountain West? Are they going to just bring people from the Mountain West? I'm very curious to see how this plays out. So one of the nice, I guess, or one of the things that are going to come from this decision is it may allow the next moves to start to happen because I'm sure, especially in the background, there's been a fair amount of conversation about, okay, what's next for the Oregon State and Wazoo and how, I mean, presumably how's the Mountain West going to work into that?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's see here. I want to also, I saw Nate. I'm going to try and get to, well, one of the Nates, pardon me. Nate Adolfi. What's going on, Nate? How are you?
I'm good. I'm just watching some action on Tuesday. Akron, East Michigan went to overtime, so it helped me hit the over. So I'm happy about that.
Yeah, are they still going? I know they were in double overtime last I checked.
Double overtime.
Exciting game, man.
Yeah, Eastern Michigan has the ball right now. They're down 3 to get to Akron.
Man, and I know Bowling Green Toledo's closed their lead, but Bowling Green still has a lead over Toledo. And that's a big one because Toledo was kind of still an outside chance of being a New Year's Six team, only because 9-1, undefeated in the MAC. Probably unlikely, only because there are a lot of other teams ahead of them in that G5, and obviously Tulane is a leading candidate right now. But yeah, so there is some interest in how that Toledo game works out tonight as well. But what's on your mind?
So I've got 2 questions. I think they're kind of long, so I'll ask my main one. But if Jimbo Fisher and A&M gets brought up, I'd love to chime in later on. But my main question is about my Texas Longhorns. So I keep getting nervous every week with these rankings. We stayed at 7 above Alabama. But what's going to happen if we keep playing these games really close? Because if I was a Bama fan, I'd be a little frustrated because they beat up Kentucky last week. They beat up LSU the week before that, who's ranked. Is the committee just going to keep putting us ahead of them because of the head-to-head back in week 2? Even though I've got to admit, I mean, Alabama's playing a lot better than Texas is right now. And also, Andrew, he did mention how they put Florida State above Washington because Washington had a bunch of close games that they shouldn't have. So I'm kind of curious of why is Texas? Why are we, still above Alabama?
Well, I'll let you start that one, Andrew. I know you're ready to jump in there.
Yeah, so that is something that they touched on briefly in the call. Texas, Alabama, and they're saying that Alabama is essentially, it almost seems like it's just residual of Texas beating Alabama in that head-to-head, and then Alabama kind of having a bit of a downtime the past few weeks. But he did admit that Alabama seems to be closing the gap a bit now that they're playing a bit stronger. So, I mean, I don't know, a few more weeks of, and this is just speculation on my part, but who knows, a few more weeks of Alabama doing consistently well. They may end up jumping Alabama. But for right now, it just seems they're kind of keeping it in a holding pattern because they haven't seen enough of a trend of Alabama to stay ahead of to go ahead of Texas.
Well, I just have to say, to me, that's almost absurd because Alabama is playing stronger at the moment. But going back to what Nate was kind of thinking there, I think Alabama can kind of rest, not rest, pardon me, but they shouldn't stress out because if they win out, they're absolutely, first of all, they're going to be in the playoffs. Second of all, I think they'll probably jump most of the teams. Because to go through and showing the strength they've had, especially now that again, I personally am. I'm in awe of how Nick Saban's got this team turned around compared to what we saw after the loss to Texas, after the USF game. That now they've seemed to have adapted on the fly with Tommy Rees, and obviously figuring out an offense that takes advantage of Milroe and letting Milroe be his own style of quarterback play. So they are terrifying, and if they can get through and then beat, because obviously now they're locked into the SEC championship game, and I'm not giving Chattanooga, even though FCS number 18, I'm not giving them much of a chance. Auburn, this is probably not their year, although crazier things have happened. I think that Georgia game is going to make a huge impact in where they land, because if they win out, they're absolutely in. And for that reason, I think to some extent the comparison with Texas right now, it's a little awkward because of it seems to be resting almost entirely on that head-to-head, especially as you've said. They've had these come from behind, these come from behind, or pardon me, not come from behind, but allowing teams to get back into it. Houston, Kansas State, and then that TCU game where, again, all of them seem like they were put out of the way, and then for some reason, Texas just decides to I don't know, almost defeat themselves. So I'm a little worried about this Iowa State game. But I'm not over. I think some folks want to oversell that game, like, oh, it's going to be cold. It's going to be a night game in Ames. And yes, Ames has a history of eating up teams that are highly ranked that go in there and just get surprised by what happens.
Conference champs go to die.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it is feasible, and Texas Tech is obviously going to give their best. Their best punch, although they're kind of unpredictable this season. But first of all, the Big 12 is probably one of the more fun races because I believe there is a way, and unfortunately, West Virginia isn't part of this, but there is a way for like 7 of the teams to finish 6-3. I mean, there is a route.
Not true. Someone actually found a way that if every home team for the rest of the year wins, it's an 8-way tie for first place.
That would be magnificent. Could you imagine? Like,
yeah, every team has a home
you're a Texas fan. No, that wouldn't be magnificent. But for the rest of us, it'd be like, hell yeah. I mean, that would be the greatest swan song for this weird 14 team, 1 year only lineup. I mean, that would be a hell of a thing. Oh my goodness. But
yeah,
I mean, because right now, I mean, isn't that the big thing? They're still trying to figure out what the tiebreaker is to get people into the title game. I mean, they're apparently going to clarify it, and they're going to say head to head is still going to matter. But this is, at this point, it kind of, Oklahoma fans I know are not thrilled with this because it would benefit Oklahoma State because they have a head-to-head with Oklahoma. So, I mean, the Big 12 is going to be pure entertainment for the end of the season, for the next couple of weeks, especially if you're into just a plethora of scenarios. Because that's the crazy thing. Iowa State could play their way in if they win out. There's a theoretical way that Iowa State could be in the Big 12 title game, which would be a miracle in of itself, considering how they lost players before the season because of a gambling scandal. One that I'm surprised didn't get more play, not because I'm like, trying to be sanctimonious about the fact that the players at Iowa and Iowa State got in trouble, but just because it's such a crazy story. It's never really happened before that we've seen that many players kind of get disqualified before the season. But yeah, Texas, I think. Again, but the thing is, going back to Texas, if they win out, it's going to be a weird thing to say that they wouldn't get in. I mean, you just have to be in the top 4. Who cares how you get there, So I wouldn't be too overly worried about, where Alabama chomping at their heels. I agree if they win out, they'll probably get higher, but I think there would be room for the Big 12 champ if it were Texas. I think at this point it can only be Texas to get someone in there.
Yeah, I put the.
I guess you're right about the whole thing about if Alabama wins, it doesn't really matter about us anyway. So I get that. Unfortunately for my Florida State fan, I'm hoping the Gators can do something Thanksgiving weekend. I think that's the best shot to kind of help Texas to get in, but we'll see. There's only 2-3 games left for most teams, but we'll see how it pans out.
It is. I think this is turning. I hate saying this, but I'm kind of rooting for someone awkwardly to get left out. Not because I don't care which team it is, only because I think it would be a great segue for the 12-team playoff next season. Because suddenly it's like, isn't it great we won't have to deal with this nonsense? Especially, can you imagine if we were still in the BCS system this late in the season with 5 undefeated teams? It would be. I mean, it would just drive people absolutely bonkers. And
sending letters to senators and congressmen and women, all that.
Oh,
trying
yeah.
to get the Supreme Court to overturn it.
Yeah, and you'd get the Liberty people still, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, not trying to disrespect Liberty, but their schedule is absolute garbage. So even though they're undefeated, we're kind of like, okay, cool, Liberty. It's great. We know you're out there, but yeah, no one can really take you seriously because unfortunately for them, no one, they're having a hard time getting anyone in the P5 to play them. Especially since they, if you beat them, not that great. If you lose to them, you lost to Liberty. And I mean, they've locked in their Conference USA title game, and it's going to be a rematch with New Mexico State, which, by the way, is kind of a cute thing, only because there were 2 seasons where New Mexico State and Liberty both were independent. They were desperate to fill their schedules, so they agreed between them to play each other twice a year in a home-and-home series just to fill out their schedules. So now they're going to play another twice in one season, except it's because the first time we were as a regular season conference game and the final time is going to be a conference title game. So if you're into those kinds of little stories, I always thought that was kind of a cute one. But yeah, absolutely. I'd love to let someone else up here too, because I'm trying to allow folks a chance to see here. I'm going to let up our other Nate, our Georgia fan Nate, and again, Eastern Michigan scored a touchdown, so they won in double overtime. So good for. I know they're the Eagles, but I always want to call them the Emus, damn it. And we've still got a good game with Toledo and Bowling Green. But Nate, what's going on? How are you?
Good, Bob. Everything's cool, man. Thanks for letting me talk. Good to hear from you. A lot of different things going on, obviously, in college football. I figured I'd jump in and just, stir up a couple different topics, see where you wanted to go with it. But I would say the first thing would be the game this weekend when you're looking at matchups. Obviously, the Georgia-Tennessee game is a big one, but I would say that Oregon State Washington game is probably the most important because, Oregon State is favored to win. And if they do end up winning at home versus Washington, it just opens up a huge door for the scenario that we've all been talking about here like the last 10 minutes, which is these one-loss teams, and then you go to the conference championship games. What does that equate to as we look at the last couple games of the season, then conference championship games? So I guess what I'm trying to say is if Washington ends up losing and then you have the 1-1 or one loss with Oregon, one loss with Washington, and they play each other, does that automatically change the outcomes of what happens with the other conference championships and then how we look at who gets into the playoffs? So I got a couple other different topics to talk about, but I think that that's one of the most intriguing things, only because you have an Oregon State team that's favored to beat the undefeated Washington team. And I just think that that'll be the game that I'm most intrigued with, obviously with Georgia and Tennessee. But when you look at the rest of the college football slate throughout the weekend, I would say those are the 2 most intriguing matchups. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up something interesting because Oregon State has the opportunity to be the ultimate spoiler, at least in terms of teams with a shot at the college football playoff, because their final 2 games are hosting Washington and then playing Oregon in what used to be called the Civil War. But they're not a bad team, so they could, if they split that, or if they, gosh, could you imagine? Because 1967, the Giant Killers of Oregon State is one of the most fascinating teams. They were, mixed results, but they knocked off some of the best teams in the country. At they knocked off at least 2 top 10 teams, including the eventual national championship USC. So I mean, Oregon State, I always think of that. The ultimate Giant Killers, the historic Giant Killers, have been the Beavs. So they have that opportunity now. If they beat Washington, let's say, and then they don't necessarily succeed against Oregon, because I think Oregon right now is especially in my opinion, one of the most complete teams right now. I mean, they lost to Washington based on a coaching gamble that has been critiqued, but sometimes you go on fourth down and you get it and you seem like a genius. But going back to that, I think Oregon would be the stronger of the two. At that point, it would probably leave Oregon as the only team in the Pac-12 with a strong chance of fighting their way into the Pac-12, because I think based on what we've seen from the committee, they like to see how teams have been trending, how they do on the field, and Oregon has been, to a lot of folks, the stronger program, especially since the Washington game. So if they manage to win out and Washington loses one and they still meet in the title game, I think Oregon would have a better shot. Now, if Washington loses and then beats Oregon, I think I'd be a little bit more nervous about that result. I could see there being, there's so many ifs here, like depending on how the other conferences work out. I think they would have the weaker record only because they've had so many of these oddball games. A lot of people didn't stay up for that Arizona State game, but that Arizona State game, it's okay for a great quarterback to have an off game, but Penix had a terrible game, or at least for him. And the only real score, the critical score, was a pick six. That was how Washington managed to win that game. And then they get into a firefight with the USC, which is, I think, understandable because, again, Caleb Williams is still a great player. The rest of the team, but so they can put up points. I think at this point, though, so again, going back to that scenario, keep hammering that home. I think if Washington were to lose one, the chance the Pac-12 would have to get in the conference title, to get into the college football playoff, would be Oregon winning out. But what? Yeah. So what was the other game we were talking about? I apologize.
Yeah, no, it's all good. Yeah, no, it's a circle of discussion always, every year. Whenever you think back to this, and it's funny you bring up the BCS. I remember doing this with friends in some of our. We have a bunch of different chats that I do college football with and whatever. And it feels like it's always like this, whether you're BCS or college football playoffs, like you always have right around this time, you get closer to rivalry weekend. It's like, I remember doing this back and forth for so many years, really. Cause there's always those scenarios where it's like, well, if this team does this team does this, and then you got 5 or 6 teams going in. A couple are undefeated, couple are with one loss. Who gets in, who doesn't? It's always the conversation every single year, I guess what I'm saying. We could do this all night. One other thing that I wanted to ask you though specifically is the Jimbo thing. And I know that got brought up earlier, so I figured it'd be a good topic. Sounds like everybody's kind of interested in it. I think I read this article that said that they already kind of knew that Jimbo was going to get termed before the Mississippi State game that happened this past weekend. So I guess my question is, if they knew what they wanted to do, and granted they absolutely demolished Mississippi State, but they already knew they wanted to get rid of Jimbo. Do you feel like they already have somebody or maybe 2 people that they're really keyed in on and want to make a move with, or do we feel like they made the move because boosters they had their vote and then they all had their meeting, and then next move is, okay, well, we're going to make the announcement whether we win or lose against Mississippi State, it's regardless of that, and then we go and jump into the vetting process. When you're dealing with the program as high profile as Texas A&M is, especially with the contract they have with Jimbo, wouldn't you think that they would have some already big time candidates vetted out and they're ready to make a move, and we'll probably hear something sooner than later? Or do you really think it's just a result of, hey, we're kind of tired of what we've been seeing, and so we're going to make the move and then we're going to look around? Yeah.
I've heard a lot of mixed thoughts on this because and they all have a certain level of credibility. I mean, my initial thought was like yours, like they must have somebody ready to go if you're doing this when you do. But I've also heard the thought that, okay, if Jimbo starts winning more, we're going to be in a more awkward position. He has a winnable final couple of games. If he wins out and then, goes to the bowl and potentially wins, this is going to be a really painful, termination. So let's just get rid of him now. The other side is, again, you need to get ahead of it anyway with such a large with the college football schedule the way it is. you have to get someone in place before, for the transfer portal, for recruiting classes. You need to get them even earlier than you used to. And is that playing a part in it? And, because some of the names being thrown out there, obviously Mike Elko, et cetera, but you also hear, like, my favorite outlandish one is Dan Campbell keeps coming up. And it's like, oh yeah, you're not going to wait until the end of the NFL season. There's just no way. I've heard this dog and pony show before. I remember when Mike Riley, when he was the Chargers head coach, was a candidate for the USC job, and they were desperate to get him, and he was like, I can't just leave the Chargers. I'm sure he said golly or something because he's such a nice guy. But you just can't realistically do that. My favorite suggestion was Dan Campbell should quietly try to be the coach, accept the Texas A&M job if they offer it to him, and still coach the Lions and not tell the Lions and not really tell. Like, I'd love to see a head coach try to pull that off. Like, there's no rule that says you can't coach a college football team.
Yeah, not to cut you off, but there's really rumors that Dan Campbell would be a consideration for that job. I have not seen that.
They're
That's
almost
really
like
funny
you always get these crazy ideas. Every time for all those times USC's head coach came open, there would always be like, oh, well, they're going to get so-and-so from the NFL. It's like, he's still employed there. It's like, why on earth would they leave with some of these guys? But yeah, no, that to me is one of the most outlandish ones. Second most outlandish, only because it wouldn't involve leaving an NFL team that's actually doing okay right now, would be like Deion Sanders. That would be such a mismatch. On sports writing would be hilarious for the foreseeable future if that were to occur. It would be such a cultural mismatch. But again, no, realistically, no. Hey, I know a couple of hands have gone up as we've been doing this. Ski Masks Murphy, your hand was up, and Nate, your hand was up. And then again, I want to get to Colson, who's been super patient as well.
Okay, Jim, but the most ridiculous thing would be a NFL coach who's currently 7-2, leading his division to leave for a college football program mid-season would be crazy. But the other name I heard that people have also asked Dabo Swinney if you think about taking the Texas A&M job, and I think he had the best response out of anyone who I've seen. Which his response was simply, "It must be November," because this is when almost every college coach gets fired, and all the rumors start swirling. And we've been seeing, it's, as some people call it, flight tracking season, where they're trying to see where the coaches are moving to.
Yes,
and I think a common one I've seen with Jimbo is that he's going to Oregon, which would also be insane considering they're currently winning. How are they going to get rid of their coach unless he's going to be a coordinator? But I don't think he's here. But the guy, like the first guy who came up and commented about James Franklin and him leaving Penn State, it would be crazy for them to fire him, because then that would be like between two coaches being fired this season, James Franklin and Jimbo, you would already be like near $150 million on buyouts. So that would just be too much money being thrown around. Something with college football would break at that point.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I'm very curious to see how the next round of these contracts gets negotiated, only because once school gets burned on one of these, it's like, what are we getting ourselves into? Nate, I know you wanted to add something here.
Oh.
Yeah, I thought this whole situation has just kind of been very awkward and weird, because I understand that they made the decision on Thursday, but to still have
awkward and weird involving Texas A&M, they're never known for having things.
I have a lot of Aggie friends, and we've actually tried to will this into happening. And so it was, the weirdest part was, you wake up Sunday morning and they won 52-10, and it's like, oh, he's gone. Like that. It was just the weirdest thing for me. But again, kind of what Nate was also saying. I feel like they had to have had somebody in mind already, but everyone that's been thrown out has been, I don't know, not many good fits. However, of Mike Norvell at Florida State being asked that, and the video is he never really denies it. And at first you'd be like, why would he leave Florida State? They're 10-0 and that kind of stuff. But I know Florida State has had a lot of frustrations about being in the ACC and not getting the same amount of money, and maybe the recruiting is not as good at Florida State as he could potentially get at A&M. So I don't know. I think it's a long shot, but there's another weird coaching name that has come up from from my realm.
Yeah, I've seen him pop up a few times, and for that very reason, it's like, well, Texas A&M is still able to pay crazy money, and Norvell has done it, but at the same time, he did great work at obviously Memphis and now FSU. But now the counter argument is he's now finally got FSU to where they're back, and certainly the Noles, they can support a coach, and they can build something for him there. I think the whole reason they got Jimbo away is he was getting kind of burned out and tired of being at Florida State and the constant pressure, and he figured, well, why don't I step it up? And you see that sometimes. I mean, we saw that with oh my gosh, Brian Kelly to some extent, maybe Lincoln Riley. They're like, I feel kind of stagnant where I'm at. Let's mix it up. That's the only reason why I kind of was interested with the Dabo one, but I'm always wary of what coaches say. I mean, Dan Lanning's come up, with Oregon, and when asked about it, he kind of went through the motions. He went a little extra. Not only did he say like everyone, he brought up his kids and said, I've got 3 kids and extremely well compensated and supported here. There's no motivation for me to go anywhere. I think that part made it a little bit more. It's like, wow, coaches typically do like to say these things, but at the same time, he seemed to be more serious. But how many times have we heard coaches sound like that, and then they're the one to move over? So I think we're all very much looking forward to seeing how A&M handles this, and if they've had someone who's been ready to go.
I was going to say, someone find the clip of Nick Saban when he was at the Dolphins saying he's not going to Alabama.
Yeah, or all the conversations
That's
about
classic.
pine boxes when it seemed like Lane Kiffin might go to Auburn. We're going back to the last time a coach said that and ended up at Auburn. But Ski Master Murphy, I know your hand was up for a sec. I know you wanted to add something. I think we actually moved on a little quick on you.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to add also in this whole coaching carousel nightmare is also Chip Kelly's name is being thrown around as being fired by UCLA after the game. So
Yep.
these 2 firings would create enough chaos. So it seems like these people have these things decided, but I don't know who they're bringing in behind these guys.
Yeah, Chip Kelly's an interesting one too. The only reason why it's made some sense is they've been disappointed with where they're going. They just seem not to. They haven't been able to capture what he was able to get done at Oregon, and they're about to go into the Big Ten. And unlike Oregon and Washington, they're getting the full Big Ten money. So they seem to have UCLA. By the way, not to rehash all of this, but when USC and UCLA announced they were moving to the Big Ten, there were 2 different reasons here. USC was always annoyed because they felt like they should get more money because they were the biggest name historically and certainly in the TV market in the Pac-12. So they moved. UCLA was kind of brought along because A, they needed a partner, but B, UCLA financially was desperate because they've always been willing to pay a lot, but they don't have the same level of support and income that some of the other programs do. So that was they were basically bailing their own program out financially. So now they have more money to potentially, incentive to spend, and it maybe they'll bring someone else in. I just have to acknowledge that my favorite comment on our CFB on the actual Reddit site was when this again, it was BRO, the Bruin Report Online, which is one of those big UCLA sites, is the one that announced that it seems very likely UCLA will fire Chip Kelly, according to many sources. My favorite comment was by user FSU Knoll 77. He suggested that Chip Kelly and Jimbo Fisher should start a podcast, Fish and Chips. And first of all, that name is awesome. Second of all, Texas fan Lunch Crunch Grinch. Again, it's always fun to have to read these usernames. At the end of every podcast, they could calculate how much money A&M paid Jimbo while he was recording. This podcast was brought to you by a generous $20,000 donation by Texas A&M Athletics. But that was one of those humorous moments that I just had to share. Nate, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just quickly, I think the biggest name that makes kind of sense, and I'm not even saying that it does because the resume isn't really there. It's almost like a worse Jimbo Fisher chance because obviously Jimbo came from a winning program at FSU, getting a national championship, and then made the big splash with the contract. But the Mike Elko thing, because he was a DC at Texas A&M, do you feel like that's the reason his name's getting brought up? Or, he brought some success to Duke, not great success, but more success than Duke's ever seen in football for the longest that I would say people can remember. Do we feel like he's the front runner, or who do you feel like may be the front runner, like a top 3? And is Mike Elko kind of being brought up because of those reasons with his connections to A&M?
Man, that's a great question because, Elko does come up a lot, partly because he's there, partly because he's won in so many different places. He's been, obviously at A&M. He's an Ivy League guy himself. He played at Penn, not Penn State. So he's had a background. He's apparently just a down-to-earth guy in terms of coaching, and a lot of that he seems naturally to be a culture fit there. I mean, that's why, a complete joke, I was suggesting Dion would be a terrible hire for that reason. Dan Lanning would also be in there because, again, I know he brought up his kids. I know he's saying like he's really happy there, but he's an SEC guy, obviously with Kirby, and has been a successful coach, and he's proven what he can do at Oregon. And Oregon, thanks to Phil Knight, certainly has the better facilities and facilities that can keep it, keep it competitive when it moves to the Big Ten. But they're also only going to get a portion of what USC and UCLA are getting from joining the Big Ten. Going to an SEC school, first of all, he knows the area. I mean, he knows the conference, and he might be a good fit. The third one, I don't know. It's so hard. I'm almost thinking we're going to get I'm wondering if we're going to get a wild card. I mean, if we're going also just based on pure who might be a good fit and would be a long-term guy there, assuming they work out, but wouldn't, because that's the thing. Like, do you want to win in the press conference? Like you announced some crazy hire, like Jimbo Fisher when they announced him. Or are you going to go with somebody who might be a more natural fit, especially for a top Texas school? I do like the idea of Jeff Traylor, the UTSA head coach. He's just a super coach by all accounts. Texas through and through, so successful as a high school coach, and then, translated that into success at the college level. And UTSA has done well. And I mean, even the handful of losses they got this season were because, again, they were out their best player. So I wonder, he would be an interesting one because, suddenly that might give A&M an edge in the state of Texas, which is such a talent hotbed, but also have someone who can coach and he'd be a long-term hire if he worked out. But I'm not sure if that's another direction they'd go. So my three there would be those guys, but I know very well that could be completely wrong. Going back to Elko, though, to me, I always think of the last head coach. Well, not the last head coach, but the head coach I think of who was successful at Duke, and granted didn't make Duke a national title contender, but that was enough to get hired elsewhere, was Steve Spurrier. I mean, that's where Florida got him from. Obviously he was like Elko, who with Texas A&M, he had strong connections to the Florida program, but that was another guy who proved that he could win at Duke and managed to make that leap. I want to let in another voice because I see Colson. You've been super patient. What's on your mind, man?
Hey, how's it going? How are y'all doing?
Great.
And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about Kansas State, man. It just feels like it's been kind of one of those what-if seasons because they're sitting at 7-3 right now, which by all means is not bad, coming off of a Big 12 conference championship. But the 3 losses, going to go through them real quick. On the road at Missouri, who's top 10 now in the CFP rankings, on a 62-yard field goal by Harrison Mevis on the road. That one feels especially gut-wrenching. Go on the road to Stillwater in a night game on a Friday night, really weird voodoo vibes. And at the time, nobody thought Oklahoma State was really going to be any good. This was,
they were on a 2-game losing streak. They lost. They'd blown out by South Alabama and lost at Iowa State. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And the team just went in there and kind of crapped all over themselves. Will Howard threw 3 interceptions, and they couldn't dig themselves out of that hole. And then the Texas game, they got down and out early. They tried to commit to the run game, and Texas's defense was just too good. They were just destroying the run game. And in the second half, they got some turnovers, figured out that they could air it out a little more, and got the offense going. And then there was just some questionable decision-making there at the end in the overtime to go for it on 4th and goal from the 5-yard line when you can tie it up. And you really had Malik Murphy just kind of scrambling all over the place. Really were shutting him down in the second half and in overtime. I really wish they had taken the 3 there and taken it to a second overtime, but I'm not the head coach. And the other frustration is with this whole tiebreaker scenario in the Big 12 because with the whole tiebreaker situation, you had if OU, OSU, and Texas and K-State had all won out, you would actually have a 3-way tiebreak for the second spot in Arlington, which K-State would come out on top because of the way the rules were written. K-State and OU not playing each other, it would default to the highest ranked Big 12 team that all 3 of the tie-breaking teams played, which in that scenario would be Iowa State. And I don't remember exactly the exact combination of how that plays out, but basically K-State would have gotten in second. Well, now this afternoon, the Big 12 said they made a correction. I'm not really sure if it was a correction. I almost think they changed the rules mid-season, which is a whole other thing. Now, obviously, I think Oklahoma State would deserve to be in there since they beat both K-State and Oklahoma. But it's a whole other thing to change the rules in the middle of the season. That seems kind of fishy to me. But just kind of venting the frustration here because the season could have been a lot better.
Yeah, and I just want to say, to be fair, K-State fans aren't the only ones upset about this, because I mean, this so-called quote-unquote clarification of the tiebreaker rules is also, I know, angering Oklahoma fans as well, because the way it seems like they're shifting the way it's going to work, and even then, who knows? I'm going to see how they clarify it, but this is just such a mess. And as I mentioned earlier, this whole situation with the end of the Big 12. I mean, it is granted, only one team in all of this group really has a shot of going beyond to like the CFP, but just from a sheer entertainment standpoint, this is so confusing.
Oh, absolutely. It's very confusing. And another point that I'd like to make is for all the teams and what's the so-called Hateful Eight, the 8 teams that are left from the original Big 12 minus Texas and OU. A lot of those teams really don't want to see a Texas and OU conference championship game as the last season where they're in the conference. That would just give them the eternal scoreboard. And what this new scenario brings in, if the clarification goes the way everybody thinks it's going to, if OSU drops another game to Houston or BYU, or I think that it's Houston and Cincinnati. I can't remember which two they play. I know they play Houston. I can't remember their other game. But if they drop a game and everybody else who's supposed to win wins, we would have a Texas and OU Big 12 championship game. And I don't think anybody from the Hateful Eight wants that. And it would all be because OSU raised the stink about the tiebreaker.
That's interesting. Yeah. So Oklahoma State's final 2 games are at Houston and BYU, which are both winnable, especially with the state of Houston. And BYU is unpredictable. And when they're away from BYU this season, they're not quite as good. I'm curious to see it again. As it came up, and I think Rocky dropped this in our replies, that Max Olson over at The Athletic has worked out a way where if every home team wins this week, there's a scenario where the Big 12 ends up with an 8-team tie for first place, which would be absolutely spectacular for those of us who do not have a horse in this race. But Nate, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just trying to segue a little bit more to some of the other stories that are going on. Not to say that this isn't important, but just giving some other interest to some other stuff too. What did you think of Sharon Moore's comments after the Michigan victory? I would actually like to hear from all the speakers in like a 20-second synopsis. I thought it was one of the weirdest, dumbest, most cringe things I've ever seen in college football the last 25 years. A guy sitting there bawling, crying, and saying stuff that is just so dumb and not even matching what happened and why it happened, with Harbaugh getting, removed from the sideline. And I thought it was just the weirdest thing. I don't even know how to describe it. When I was watching it, I was like, is this real? Like, did that guy go do like some drugs and then it caused him to start crying on national television? I thought it was the weirdest, saddest thing that I've seen in a while. Crying because your head coach got caught cheating. Dude, I can't wait to hear what you have to say, Bob, and I would love to hear what everybody else has to say.
I definitely see some hands up. My thought on this, I actually don't mind. I get why people are passionate. It's a passionate sport. I saw in my mind, like, one thing that I will give Michigan is their ability to just keep the outside stuff away from the team, in the sense that they seem focused. They were focused. They are willing to, they're willing to apparently run the ball 32 times in a row, but they are willing to they're able to keep out all the outside noise. And to an extent, I can imagine that is heavily reliant on the coaching staff. So not just Harbaugh, but Sharon Moore, Jesse Minter, Jay Harbaugh, Mike Hart, the whole team over there. And now that game was over, I wonder if we just saw all of that pent up, like we're focused, we're going to win this game, coming out all at once, and a lot of emotion. And they clearly like each other enough, or at least respect each other enough in that program, that we saw that kind of that outpouring at the end. And I don't mind that. I don't mind when coaches get a little passionate. I love it. I mean, earlier in the season with Ryan Day kind of cutting a WWE promo after the Notre Dame game, challenging not challenging Lee Corso, but certainly making that spicy. I mean, I don't mind that stuff, but I could see where people feel that. I'm going to get to, and I saw we had a couple of new hands and as a couple of requests. But Ski Master Murphy, I saw your hand up first, but I promised to get to you, Nate Colson, and we'll get to the Water Boy and John.
I would first like to clarify that our coach wasn't caught doing any kind of cheating. He was a member of the staff who was caught cheating, so we got to clarify that. Secondly, there's nothing wrong with seeing a man express emotion for another man that he loves. But, even as a Michigan fan, I have to say, if you were not aware of anything going on in college football, if you watched that, you thought Jim Harbaugh either died or was actually arrested. It wasn't a good look. But,
I agree.
Yes, it was on his heart.
I mean, the Michigan versus the world thing is cute and everything, but I have to acknowledge the fact that Harbaugh said Michigan should be America's team because it has been through adversity and criticism and the naysayers. And again, Michigan fans I think are also self-aware of this. And one of the most popular replies on that particular conversation was a Michigan fan saying, "Cutting corners, deflecting blame, and turning a scandal into a court battle. How much more American can you be?" But Nate, I know you also had your hand up.
Yeah, I don't know. I think for me, I think it was kind of like, I'm not defending Michigan. They cheated, and it's people that are upset about that deserve to be upset about it. But I think that, and everyone saying they haven't played anybody, like, or do they even deserve to be here? And then I think him just being an African American coach, and we know in a sport that's predominantly African American players, how often do you to win a big game, something like that, which could help him potentially get a head coaching job in the future. So I think it was just him, like, big of a moment it was, for him and the players more so. And again, yes, the relationship he has with Harbaugh, whether he knows about all of that. So that was kind of my take on it, what I saw.
Mm-hmm. Colson, how about you?
I think a big part of this is really motivation. Everybody in football is always looking for a way to motivate, get that bulletin board material. Top teams, you always hear Nick Saban talk about the rat poison. I think this is Michigan and their coaching staff trying to keep the team motivated and keep them going through this whole thing, through this whole ordeal. And also the Jim Harbaugh America's team thing. I don't want to hear anybody saying they're America's team unless they are James Madison. James Madison is absolutely America's team.
Oh, James Madison. I feel bad we barely brought them up today, only because at one point I mentioned Liberty as being an undefeated team. And of course, James Madison. Oh my gosh. It's worse than forgetting about Dre. I can't believe I forgot to bring them up. Yeah, no, absolutely. Hey, John, you've been super patient. What's going on?
Hey, man, how you doing tonight?
I'm good, thank you.
Hey, well, first of all, I like to say Old Dominion University is really America's team, and no one can tell me anything differently because we suffer like the rest of the country suffers on a daily basis. So I know I'm a little late, so I just want to ask real quick. Has anything been discussed about Annie Avalos tonight?
No, because Boise State's actually the one. I wonder if Boise State letting go of him is one of the reasons why suddenly we got San Diego State announcing the retirement of Brady Hoke.
Yeah, and so that's why I wanted to ask, because I don't follow the Mountain West too closely, so I'm very confused with how a coach with a very good record. I know they're 5-5 this year, but I mean they're only 3 years in. Dismissing a coach for I think it's a pretty good performance in the G5 level. So I'm just kind of curious on your thoughts and maybe the group's thoughts, maybe on why this happened.
With Boise State, I do. While this doesn't seem that bad, if you think of them as more of a generic G5 program, Boise State's had such an incredible run with so many head coaches. I mean, ever since, because I mean, I remember when Carter was there, Dirk Carter, before he took the Arizona State job, followed by Dan Hawkins, who did stellar there before he had that unfortunate tenure at Colorado, which ended up being a trend for a lot of head coaches who ended up at Colorado. He's now he's been at UC Davis and been doing pretty damn well down there. Followed by Chris Peterson, who I think is the point. Dan Hawkins kind of built what they had, at least the team that we knew, back in the aughts. And then Chris Peterson not only ran with it, but improved on it. And so that kind of run in particular made the expectations at Boise State where they are now. And it's a tremendous expectation there. But I think they get that, and they've always had to kind of fight. Because, I mean, Boise State also, gets, I believe, an even slightly larger cut of the pie in the Mountain West because of what they've been able to bring in, because of the attention they've been able to bring to that program. And Brian Harsin, I mean, they were impatient with Brian Harsin. Like, they were not utterly disappointed when Auburn made that ill-fated gamble on bringing him down to the Plains, because, Harsin, he did fine there, but he didn't have the same level of winning streak. I mean, he was winning almost, he was winning over 75% of his games. And even then, the Boise State faithful were still a little bit impatient with him because they thought, it would have been even higher stakes for probably even higher numbers for Peterson and Hawkins. But I think Avalos, I think this was a make or break season for him, and I understand why they didn't give him as much patience, only because 10-4 last season was okay, was all right. I mean, it sounds weird to say that, right? But 5-5, I mean, it had been so long since they had done so badly in the just as a record that it just wasn't enough, and they ran out of patience there. And I'm curious to see who they'd go to next. I wonder if Boise State can maintain the success that they'd had before. But certainly, it makes it interesting with San Diego State suddenly in the market, because I think in the Mountain West, those are two of the more interesting jobs, two of potentially the more desirable jobs, just historically speaking. San Diego State, because you're in San Diego and you're in the middle of that California hotbed, and they've built a brand new shiny stadium. Although, granted, San Diego State is a little bit it's been a tough season for them, because think about it. At the beginning of July, it sounded like they were going to be the next member of the Pac-12 to replace USC and UCLA. They thought they were on the top of the world. They were in that awkward thing where and how soon we've forgotten. They tell the Mountain West that, hey, we're probably leaving, but hey, we'd like to still be in the Mountain West. And the Mountain West said, no, we heard that you just said you want to leave, so we're now kicking you out of the conference, or we're acting like you're leaving the conference. All that brouhaha started, and then, to the horror of everybody, they watched the Pac-12 explode, because that was a problem for both the conference of the Big Mountain West, because they would certainly be rated, and San Diego State, which got stuck with a head coach with a boring offense who wasn't able to pack that stadium. But I see a couple of hands up, Nate and John. And then I'd love to have the Water Boy chime in, because I know he's got some strong views on actually San Diego State and especially Michigan.
I'm going to mix it up again real quick, Bob. Billy Napier at Florida, obviously having a rough year. And then, quickly, he has at Missouri and Florida State left for the rest of his schedule. How long do you think he coaches at Florida? And if they give him another year next year, does he get fired in the middle of the season? He's going to go 0-2 after – next weekend and the following. I just think it's going to be a really hard sell once we go mid-season with Billy, and then just thinking ahead, who replaces that?
With Billy Napier, I think the thing that might help him a little bit here is the fact that now we know that there's other big head coaching spots coming up. Because I mean, previously we knew, it's not as high profile, but we knew Michigan State was obviously available. But now suddenly Texas A&M is available, and who else is going to suddenly throw their hat into the market? So I wonder if they're willing to also just give him that third season, and then have that finger on the button midway if they need to be the first big team historically, national championship caliber team to fire the head coach. But I'd be curious to see if they're willing to risk jumping into a market that might get crowded with crazy Texas A&M money out there as well, going for candidates. John, what was your thought? I know we've hit a couple of topics here.
Yeah. I was just, let's respond back to about the Boise State conversation. I'm curious to see too, if they're actually able to, keep this revolving door of great coaches in and out. And so it makes, I'll be honest, if I'm a Boise State fan personally, I would be a little nervous. I'll be honest, I would kill for a coach that went 10 wins last year. So it's just crazy as a fan from another G5 program, seeing someone get looked up for that. One last thing, I know people are skeptical about Michigan being America's team, but I want to say that CFB Talk is America's Twitter space, and no one can tell me differently.
You don't have to kiss my butt that much. I appreciate it, though. All right. Hey, let's see. Colson, I want to get to you in a second, but the Water Bowl, you've been super patient. What's going on, man?
3 topics. First, Boise State. So when you go to the Mountain West Media Days, you can feel from like the other media, the expectations at Boise State are very different than the rest of the Mountain West teams. And that is those expectations is basically what got their coach fired. The craziest thing, though, is Boise State can still win the Mountain West. If they win out and they get the right loss or two, they'll be in the Mountain West conference title game. So literally they could fire their coach with 2 games to go and still win the conference. As far as Michigan, it's like watching almost like political theater. You see all the ESPN media telling everyone that the cheating scandal is the worst thing ever. And then you see the Fox Sports side, and they're basically like on the opposite end. It's really not that big of a deal. It happens all over the place. And we're making mountains out of molehill, mountains out of molehills. And when you just kind of look at it from like afar, it almost feels like it's like politics. It's a money driven thing from the 2 entities that have all the money in college football. And then San Diego State. Oh, thank goodness. If I'm mad at Michigan, it's because they sent Brady Hoke back and his retirement, aka please leave and let's find a way to pay you out over time. It was so desperately needed. His first stint at San Diego State, the credit really was the defense, which was Rocky Long. And then him replacing Rocky Long, his first that really good year was just kind of the coattails of Rocky Long. And every year we've gone down, and that offense is just the passing game so bad. I mean, last year we had a backup safety come in to be quarterback because the quarterbacks couldn't quarterback. Just we need a fresh start, and I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Hey, Colson, I see your hand up. What's your thoughts right now?
Yeah, I just wanted to spin back to Billy Napier real quick. I was a student at Florida for a couple years, and so I've seen some of these teams in person. And let me tell you, the Utah game last year really got people excited and really thought, Billy Napier was going to turn things around quick. But over the last 2 years, it's really gone downhill really fast. And I think that's due to Billy Napier's reluctance to hire an offensive coordinator. He's been calling all the plays, and to be honest, his offense is pretty stale. Although the offense has been steadily improving this year. Graham Mertz has played really good, and they do have some young playmakers in Trevor Etienne, and Eugene Wilson has come on really well in the last few weeks, and Ricky Pearsall is just an absolute animal. But and you obviously have DJ Lagway coming in next year, but the schedule next year is just absolutely brutal. Maybe one of the hardest college football schedules I've ever seen. You got to play Florida State, Miami, and UCF all in the non-conference. You got the Florida gauntlet, and then just the SEC gauntlet of Tennessee, Georgia, LSU, all those teams. It's going to be really tough. I see maybe 4 wins on this, and although he may not deserve it, Billy will probably get fired next year.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we see the classic, like right before this next season, he changes maybe some of the assistant staff just to try and make that Hail Mary that maybe it was just sort of one or two things, 1 or 2 tweaks might get them better. But yeah, I'm curious to see that, and thank you for your opinions on that. That was really interesting. We have one other folk up here. Let's see here, Nazir, what's going on?
Nothing much. Reddit college football. I love everything that's going on. I don't know if you talked about this. I saw you tweet about it earlier, but what's your thoughts on Eric Dooley, the head coach of Southern University, getting fired today officially, even though they have a potential chance to win a SWAC with Alcorn going down to Texas Southern and laying an egg. Alcorn really laid an egg that game. And then you look at PV. This is basically how it's going down in the SWAC West. If Alcorn loses to Jackson and PV loses and Southern were to potentially win, they will be playing in the SWAC championship against Tallahassee. Now, and Tallahassee against FAMU. Now we know FAMU from SWAC and HBCU football. FAMU is probably going to win and go on to the Celebration Bowl representing the SWAC. But what's your thoughts based on that? Because I thought Dooley, even though he was calling the plays on offense and it was getting very predictable, it was still very early in SWAC for that to happen.
Yeah, and whenever you see a team do that, because we are kind of talking about that earlier, because with Boise State, their decision to fire their head coach, I mean, technically Boise State is also in the race for the Mountain West, but they needed that change now. I was surprised we saw a SWAC firing this early on. It just, especially again, the team isn't on fire or anything where it's like because there have been a couple of uglier examples right now, at least in the D2 level in HBCU football, where some coaches have been fired, and it seems like they were just making, the administration got tired of their complaints. I wonder, do you think they have somebody already? I mean, because that's the thing, when you fire somebody this early in the cycle, I mean, I always think there's two avenues, and it's something that's come up even with Jimbo, a very different, budget situation there. Like, are you firing them this early because you have somebody already in mind and you just want to get them there to make sure there's a seamless transition to the probably the recruiting and the portal and all the things that make college football almost an all year round kind of situation? Or is it that you're just trying to get your name out there that, hey, this is going to become available? Ski Mask Murphy, I know you have your hand up and I know you have thoughts on this.
Oh yeah, I mean, we've talked on it here a few times. HBCU sports have, especially football, have been in like a very weird place. With the firing of the head coach at FAMU, it really makes no sense outside of more than likely having administration problems. And then also the fact that if they do win the SWAC and just went up, more than likely they might even skip the Celebration Bowl and do the actual playoffs like they did a couple of years ago. But yeah, if he's getting fired, it's probably something on the administration side. And after that point, there's nothing to do about it. I mean, I even posted in the actual Reddit about what happened at my D2 school. And yeah, a lot of things behind the scenes happen that just get out of hand.
And that's really disheartening. I'm sorry. That's really disheartening because it's like, D2 this year, HBCU football really went, they really did very well. You've seen Tuskegee and multiple schools such as Bowie State go down and defeat the D1 versions of the HBCU. So it's just a lot going on. It's very disheartening to see that.
Part of me wonders, like, how much of this have expectations been just risen in the past couple of seasons? I mean, is this? I don't want to keep saying, because I mean, obviously Deion's no longer at Jackson State, and I don't want to overstate, necessarily the impact he had, but seeing what he did there, and then some of the excitement that's generated around programs across the country, has that also raised expectations where maybe programs are a little more impatient? I mean, could that be some of the factors, especially with a more established HBCU program like Southern? Like, because I mean, imagine if they went out Prairie View, A&M, in Grambling, in the Bayou Classic. Like, there's so many thoughts that I have here that I agree. I'm surprised they decided to pull that trigger so fast.
And speaking on that, I believe that with Deion, it really sped up the process because I really believe what happened with every other school with that decision was, Grambling. Coach Fobbs, I was going to say he's a bad coach. He led us to a Celebration Bowl win. It was getting very repetitive. I mean, you had a D1 bounce back, Elite 11 quarterback with DeMonte Kincaid. You get Martez Carter. You get Anthony Simmons from Mississippi State. When you get those D1 bounce back guys and you put them in the right system, they're going to do good. And when you see what Deion did, and not only with the transfer portal, but also with recruiting, getting 5-star kids to come look at an HBCU and say, I'm going to go to Jackson. with HBCUs, you got to look at the resources. The resources that HBCUs, they're outdated. They are extremely outdated. So for Dion to come in with his contract, when you really look at his contract, he didn't even make $1 million. But what he made his money off of was ticket sales. But he was able to do brand deals like how he's doing right now with Affleck, and use his face and exposure to build around Jackson. Now what I will say about HCs, we have lots of land and opportunity, but the money is a big thing. So for Dion to just come in and all of a sudden just flip Jackson State from a lower SWAC East team to a perennial powerhouse, that's what changed the time clock, I believe, for all HBCUs. And it started to become, well, when are we going to get our Dion? And they're starting to see the effects of it now, to where Dion was able to do what he does because, and this is why I always say, if you can't tell my name, my dad's African. And it's like Dion's known all around the world. The coaches that we're getting now they're known coaches in the football world, but they're not international household star names.
Ski Mask Murphy, I see your hand up. I'd like to let you hop in.
Yeah, I would like to say HBCU sort of basing what they want their coaches to do now off of what Dion was able to do. Is I've heard of a few of them trying to do that, and it's one of those things you can't really replicate, because Dion is in terms of sports, period, because he played football and baseball, he's a complete enigma. Like, he's nicknamed Prime Time for a reason. So he's able to do things that other people just aren't able to do, especially considering, like, he almost destroyed college football and upset the power balance of being the first non-FBS program to recruit the #1 player in the nation in Travis Hunter. And if they think other coaches can just replicate that, it's just not a thing that can happen. And then them looking at Jackson State and seeing what Dion is able to do with who Dion is, and thinking other coaches can just be brought in and not given resources, as they've been held back for a very long period of time, as we saw follows with Ed Reed and other high-profile coaches that came, and it's just not going to be able to be done. I mean, I believe Eddie George has done a decent turnaround Tennessee State, but if they're thinking everyone's just going to be able to beat Dion and do those kinds of things, it's just not going to happen. I mean, my school thought they would be able to just have a coach come in and do things, and it's like, well, you brought him in after recruiting season and didn't give him a strength and conditioning program. You're just not going to be able to succeed. It's more than just bringing a face. You have to truly build a program the same way Eddie Robinson did. It takes time.
Absolutely. Let's see here. We're now going in just on a time check. It's now been going for a little over an hour and 20 minutes. Typically, I try to wrap these up after about 90 during the season, just for my own sanity. But I want to go through, just hit a couple of lighter notes. I get a kick out of, there's a lot of things that have been going on this week. Two of the lighter ones that came up today: the Bahamas Bowl had to move to Charlotte because apparently the stadium in Nassau in the Bahamas had to get repairs done. So it's out of commission for like 2 years. And I guess that's just, the speed things get done on the islands. But so it's going to be in Charlotte, and they're playing at the UNC Charlotte, so aka the Charlotte 49ers stadium. It's going to be now called the Famous Toastery Bowl. Because apparently there's a chain called Famous Toastery, one of the more awkward names I've ever heard. The quote that people jumped on was, "The Famous Toastery Bowl is a perfect showcase for those who are not quite familiar with the Famous Toastery and the city of Charlotte," which I guess means that they're not that famous. But one of the more awkward bowl names. But there you go. We're gonna have Famous Toastery action, because that's typically one of the first bowls. So the other one is the Military Bowl. Apparently signed a deal, so it's going to be now called the Military Bowl, presented by GoBowling.com. GoBowling.com, I guess it's for finding bowling alleys. It's one of the strangest things I've ever seen. I believe one of the Reddit users, Fanty Yellow, pointed out this website looks like it's a front for a money laundering scheme. And I guess they've sponsored NASCAR races, but to this day, no one is entirely sure what they do. So again, on a lighter note, that was one of those thoughts that came out there. One of the other kind of interesting things, again, we touched a little bit on the fact that Chip Kelly appears like he might be out, which I wonder if it's news to him. I mean, they still have a game to go. UCLA at US versus USC is always a good rivalry. We'll see how that goes. Can USC stop this bleeding who knows? Who knows what's going on there? We also wanted to mention in all the sadness of this week, apparently Shador Sanders' Rolls Royce got booted. That was one of those stories that also hit Reddit pretty hard. See a couple of hands up because I guess some of these topics got some of y'all talking here, thinking here. Let's see here. I apologize. I'm going to go in just the order I see the hands because I did not see when they went up. John, what's your thought?
I'm just outraged. There's no chess.com bowl this year. I mean, the horror, but man.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I mean, how cheap are bowls that some of these sponsors are popping up here? Like, and I mean, to be fair, I do know somebody who was at, I don't want to say the sponsor, but one of the major bowl sponsors, at least at the time. And he said because I asked him, my thought was, when the playoff appeared, did this devalue a lot of these bowls in terms of how much they could ask for a sponsor? And he said, yes, absolutely. Suddenly, 6 of the bowls became in the playoff became very attractive to sponsors, and so they wanted to get their names on those bowls. But every other bowl suddenly became a lot less valuable because they figured, oh, people are going to not pay attention to them as much. So there was a little bit of shuffling for those initial years of sponsors moving from one game to supposedly even a higher profile game because, frankly, the prices went down. So yeah, no. Now at this point, I'm like, whoa, how much are these lower end bowls?
Yeah,
But who?
I was going to say, like, can we group fundraise and see if we get our own bowl?
God, okay, I'm gonna just one last thing on this topic because I remember, in 2013, 14, we actually talked about trying to do a RCFB like group GoFundMe or whatever. Like I can't even remember what the popular Kickstart or whatever to try and sponsor a bowl. And I even got into some light conversations with some bowls I can't bring up, but I had a conversation with them and they said like, well, we could do this. We actually talked about what it would require. I think it was just too squirrely for them to say like, yeah, let's have a bowl sponsorship that relies on money that has not been raised yet. But we actually threw that around for a little while, and it got too complicated, and that would have been a hell of a thing to try and pull off. But Ski Mask Murphy, what's on your thought?
Yeah, since you said you want to switch things to some lighter notes, one of the things, I guess it was a small press release that happened earlier today. If you don't, people aren't aware, ESPN is now having its own, I guess, sports book. And so earlier today, they announced basically all of the old Sports Nation's social media accounts from that show, they're all being turned into ESPN Bet. And most of those accounts have been dead for a little while, but still have about 5 to 10 million followers per platform. So if you're like a sports fan who's been following sports accounts for a while on social media, do not be alarmed if out of nowhere you just start seeing ESPN Bet advertisements come up because they just took over. They're just transferring a lot of accounts.
Wow. There's so much money in that. It's absolutely nuts. So I'm not surprised to see more of that happening. Let's see here. Colson, I know you also had a thought you wanted to follow up on.
Yeah, I still think it's a crime that we got rid of the Cheez-Its Bowl last year and replaced it with the Pop-Tarts Bowl. I honestly think that's genuinely a crime, especially with my favorite college football commercial still being the I woke up feeling the cheesiest coach commercial. That chills every time. Right up there with the BK commercial. I just think it's an absolute travesty that we don't get to see that every year anymore.
Y'all are Satan out there. That's all I gotta say. I can't I'm always amazed at which commercials are popular because they drive me absolutely bat. But I'm not gonna finish that. But they drive me absolutely nuts. Some of those things. Nate, I know your hand's up. Well, okay, wait, George. Wait, oh gosh, I see both Nates had their hands up. George and Nate, you can go first. We'll go to other Nate. Sorry.
Real quick, Ski Mask or Bob, regarding that betting situation, didn't it get passed? Correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm looking for more information here. I thought it was a federal passing where the sports betting was allowed, and then it was to be governed by the states to instill sports betting. And then at that point, I guess my question is, does it then become a state issue if you can establish betting within the state, to set up however you want to do that? Or did that get turned over, or do you guys know, or anybody?
I'm going to fully admit I'm not as super up and up on the state by state rules for gambling. I know a lot of it is, as you pointed out, state by state regulations, and it's extremely regulated industry to the point where I can't imagine the amount of billables you get if you are helping arrange some of these for some of these companies. But I know I wouldn't be surprised if it's left to the states. That's one where I could see that the states get that opportunity to regulate it. But
yeah, I feel like it was like 2 or 3 years ago, right around that like range. And I guess we could all Google it, but I was just, since we're on that topic, I just threw it out there. But I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago. It was a federal law where sports betting could happen, and then once that got put in place, then it became a state law where you could officially bet. But if you look at like say DraftKings, I bring it up because if you look at DraftKings or you look at some of the other betting sites, they have disclaimers at the bottom that list the states that allow it.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so friends of mine that that live in different states, I try to bring them into groups and we do all this stuff. And then some of them say, oh, I can't do it because of my state. And I'm like, I thought it was a federal law. And then you see the advertisements that are becoming more and more prevalent as you watch a game or on television. I guess it's still maybe a federal law, but the states have to approve whether or not you can do it, I guess would be my small interpretation.
Right, yeah. I think you absolutely are dead on accurate with that, only because of that exception. I know also other Nate Adolph, sorry, you had your hand up. What did you want to add here? And then I have one other person who's up here that will also get a chance to chime in.
Yeah, so I'll address what Jordan was talking about. So I currently live in Colorado, but I'm from Texas originally, and so yes, federally it's not illegal to bet and gamble anymore, but it is up to the states. So like I have the DraftKings app, and so I can use it while I'm in Colorado. But if I go to a state that doesn't allow it, it knows my location and it doesn't let me. I can't do anything on it. So you just have to be in a state that you're allowed to gamble in. So yeah, there's been a couple of times where like I travel for a wedding and I'm like, oh, like it's Saturday, like let me get something in, and I can't.
Got it.
But yeah, what I actually wanted to bring up was when you're talking about the bowl games, was have they already decided the expanded playoff who's like what bowl games those are connected to, or is that to be determined still?
Gosh, I thought they have actually announced that. I know they have that sorted out. I don't have it in front of me, but I do know they have some idea, at least of those final bowl games, which ones are going to be in. And I apologize, I don't have it in front of me, but I know months and months ago talked about it. I'm not saying that in the like, why weren't you around months and months ago? But I know it has been sorted out. Ski Mask Smurfy, I know your hand is up, and then I'd love to have Depressed, or probably Andy Good Times. You can be next.
Yeah, I was just going to say that they do have the 12-team playoffs sorted out. It's basically going to alternate between the already New Year's Six games, but I think they have it set up so that the first round games can be hosted at the discretion of who the home team is. So whoever the home team is they can host it at home, but I think they're still waiting to see if some of the conferences may set it up that when their team gets in, it gets hosted at a particular sort of bowl game location for like more money or neutral site stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know they were working out exactly that for those first round home games, especially with some of those details. Let's see here. I want to allow let's hear Depressed American University, Andy Good Times. What's going on, man?
All right. I was first, talk about Nate's points. All you have to do is just get a VPN and you're good. No need to have to worry about which state you're in. I'm in North Carolina right now, and I mean that it's currently in the legislature, but it's still illegal, and enough people find a way around it. It's not hard. But my question for you is, I don't know if you saw the Reddit about how Jimbo Fisher's firing can be correlated to the rise in oil prices in stock because of what's going on geopolitically over in the Middle East. So what geopolitical events have to happen for the Tar Heels to buy out Gene Chizik's contract?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I was wondering what direction that was going to go. I'm like, oh my goodness, which direction
dude.
go in and do it? Like,
that is one of the funniest comments. Yeah.
Like, am I going to have to break out my international relations degree? Am I going to have to just pretend we didn't actually hear that question? I'm like, where are we going to go with this?
Do it, Bob. Break it out.
But no, oh gosh, North Carolina, like, so wow, North Carolina has been so frustrating this season because, again, Drake May, solid quarterback, and it feels like we've stopped talking about him because, again, the team just kind of, it hasn't done awful, but it just kind of fell off the map. And, it's one of those frustrating things I can't imagine. So I assume you're a North Carolina fan, by the way.
I'm an alumnus. Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
So is that what you think is that your solution for the program? They should eject Chisney?
I mean, you've had, even before that, you went straight from Sam Howell to Drake May. And I mean, there are programs that dream every day to get just one of those guys in there for in a 20-year span. And you have back-to-back game-changing quarterbacks, and you just have defenses. I don't know if you saw that Georgia Tech game. I mean, they couldn't stop a JV team. And I mean, you're getting the recruits. They're just not playing as a team. And you have to look at
That's what I was going to ask real quick. When you saw how UNC was ranked beginning of the year and then they lost to Georgia Tech, I was like, oh my gosh, probably top 5 biggest shock game, I would say, of the year.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they just can't stop anyone on defense. That's the reality.
They should start a kind of a group chat with LSU and USC and just kind of all commiserate about, man, we had great quarterbacks and some damn good offense, but boy, defense, what is that?
Yeah.
But I sympathize with you, man, and we'll see how that works out because I think man, I don't know. Is that going to be the answer? And would Mac Brown do it? Because again, it's been exciting to see UNC good, but man, this is frustrating. It is absolutely frustrating for those folks, and we sympathize with that. You'll see. I can see a couple of hands up, and I think I'll slowly start wrapping us up after that. Nate, I see your hand up, and then we'll get to Ski Masks Murphy.
Yeah, I want to go back to the whole oil comment. So funny that you said that. So one of my good friends, like I said, I got a lot of Aggie friends. His uncle actually has his name on one of the new football buildings in College Station, and so we've always been poking fun at him this past season about, hey, like, tell your uncle he's got to write that check to get rid of Jimbo. And so we talked about actually, because he's involved in the oil industry, is actually getting the oil prices to jack up so they'd have the money to actually get rid of Jimbo. So I don't know if that's what happened or not, but it's been discussed.
Oh my goodness. Could you imagine that? That would be the funniest thing. Oh my gosh. Like, so get some real greenwashing going, get some of the Middle Eastern oil money coming in there too. Suddenly the LIV college football or whatever, bull. But Ski Master Murphy, what's going on? Let's wrap this up but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, with the talk about UNC disappointment and then Jimbo Fisher leaving, let's just complete the cycle of chaos and just send Mac Brown to Texas A&M.
Oh my goodness. He would be absolutely, that would be chaos for everyone involved, and that would be glorious, especially with Texas coming into the SEC. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this up here. We've been going on for about an hour and 40 minutes. Tuesday nights, we like to always hear from you and have these conversations. My name's Bobak Ha'Eri. This is our CFB Talk 165. This automatically turns into a recording if you want to hear the beginning, and we'll eventually get this up wherever you get your podcasts, just so that it'll be timelessly available. But on behalf of all of us, I wanted to thank everyone who joined us. I love hearing from all of you and hearing your thoughts on college football. We'll go ahead and wrap this up here. Now I'm going to hang up.